welcome to episode 2 of The Notebook, a twice-weekly show here at Oilersnation, where Zach Laing, Cam Lewis, and myself will break down all of the NHL stories and rumors heading into the trade deadline. And gentlemen, the last 24 to 48 hours, well, we can say they've been a little bit busy. For starters, Frank Saravalli's number one trade target in Elias Lindholm was shipped out from the Calgary Flames to the Vancouver Canucks. Cam, I'll ask you first. What'd you think of the deal overall?
It was a pretty significant pay for the Vancouver Canucks, but then again, that's kind of what happens when you go ahead and make a big trade in January or February. You know, the trade deadline isn't until a week into March, so there aren't that many teams out there who are thinking, yeah, let's pack it up and let's say we're giving up on this season. We're going to continue trying to sell tickets, getting people to come watch the season. We've given up, but the Calgary Flames now have gone ahead and made two deals with the Canucks. Earlier, there was defenseman Nikita Zadorov going to Vancouver. Now it's Lindholm, so they've added a forward and a defender. And the reality is when you're going to pull the trigger on deals well ahead of the deadline, you're going to get a guy for an extra month. You have to pay for that. So Vancouver's paid a significant price, but I mean, they've got lightning in a bottle this year. The team's doing way better than anybody thought. It's reasonable to lean in. This looks like a team that could go on a deep playoff run. The
Canucks look like a team that's destined for a deep playoff run, like you mentioned. Calgary gets disgruntled winger Andrei Kuzmenko, defensive prospect Hunter Bruce-Stevich. Yep, nailed that one. And a first-round pick and a conditional fourth. Zach, let me ask you, who do you think won this trade?
Well, first and foremost, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that guy's name. I don't think I'm going to be able to get it. I'm going to butcher it. You know, when I first saw the deal, I kind of didn't really think it was a great deal for both sides. My initial reaction was being tepid about the return for Lindholm from Calgary's perspective, and considering what Vancouver appears to have given up here. Now, Bruce-Stevich and Jermo, the other prospect that were acquired, both third-round picks of the Vancouver Canucks. This Bruce-Stevich guy is pretty interesting. He's putting up some big points in the Ontario Hockey League this season, and there's been some comparison of him as a player to Adam Fox. And we all remember the Adam Fox saga in Calgary. He chose not to sign there and he got shipped off to Carolina, later to the New York Rangers. And he's turned into a great defenseman for them. So, you know, there's part of me that's like, oh man, it would be kind of hilarious if, you know, this guy pulled the same thing that Adam Fox did, given the comparisons. But the reality is the more that I think about it, the more that I actually think this was probably a pretty solid deal for both teams here. I mean, if you really take a look at things, you know, Calgary gets back first round pick. That's more or less going to be an early second round pick. You could kind of consider it, considering it's going to be in the 25 to 32 range. They get a pretty good prospect here, another guy who can be a bit of a project and a conditional pick as well. I wouldn't say that both teams were like A+ on this deal. I think both teams did well. Maybe give them both a B grade on this deal.
I earlier this season said Andrei Kuzmenko was going to score 50. So here's to hoping some good stuff for the Calgary Flames. In other news, another big deal went down just a couple hours ago, and it doesn't involve the Edmonton Oilers, as the Winnipeg Jets acquired center
Sean Monahan
from the Montreal Canadiens just a couple days after Mark Scheifele's been placed on IR. The Jets send their first-round pick in 2024, along with a conditional pick to the Habs for Monahan. Instant analysis, Coombsy, what do you think?
It seems like for me, Montreal probably saw Vancouver and Calgary making this trade. They saw Lindholm going to Vancouver, the price that was paid, and they thought, you know what? Let's go ahead. And then if you're Winnipeg, you've got your top line center on the injured reserve now. Difficult to say when he's going to come back or how that's going to look. They didn't have great center depth before that regardless. So now they have Scheifele who can fill in, Monahan can fill in for Scheifele in the top spot. And then when Scheifele gets back, Monahan goes down to where he should be, which is on your second line. I think that, yeah, this is kind of the same thing that I mentioned in the earlier point, is that when you see the market shrinking, then you're going to have to jump in. Lindholm was the number one player on daily faceoffs list. The next name right after that was Sean Monahan, and now both those two players are gone. And you wonder, you know, how many guys are going to be left when the trade deadline rolls around, and maybe the All-Star break is the new trade deadline, because teams are realizing you need time for these guys to get in there, get to know everyone, get to know your coach, get to know your line mates, get comfortable. Like, getting a guy right at the deadline a month before the playoffs maybe isn't the move. Maybe you want a guy for an extra month and you're going to go ahead and pay the price for it.
Yep, exactly. Zachary, what do you think about Sean Monahan being picked up? I feel like this guy, at least the Montreal Canadiens, traded him at his absolute peak. He's been a guy who's dealt with injuries throughout his entire career. This season, double digits in goals, playing really well. I feel like they sold him off at the perfect point.
Yeah, I think so. They bought low and they sold high. And I think, from a market perspective, that's what you want to do. The fact that Sean Monahan returned a first round pick is a real surprise to me.
That's nuts.
And I will give all of the credit in the world where it's due, because our boy Frank Saravalli took a lot of heat when he reported last week that it was looking like a first round pick is what Montreal was going to get. And, credit where it's due to Montreal. Again, they were able to turn Monahan's career around a little bit here. He's had, he's looked good in Montreal. I wouldn't say it's great. I do think it's a bit of an overpay from Winnipeg's perspective. Personally, I'm glad the Oilers didn't give up their first round pick this year for Monahan. For as solid as a player as he could be, that is a pretty hefty price to pay. And I think when we talk about, as Cam mentioned here, teams getting the jump early, like this is what the Oilers did in 05-06 when in January, they made some moves and picked up guys like Dick Tarnstrom and Yaroslav Spacek in January. And then come trade deadline time, they made a couple more impact moves. I think that's what the Jets are doing here, trying to pick up Monahan, get him acclimated a little bit earlier. And same thing with the Vancouver Canucks and Lindholm, trying to get a head start on seeing what these guys can look like in their team, because it can take time for these guys to mesh. I mean, we remember as Oilers fans a couple years back when they made the move for Andreas Athanasiou with the deadline, right? And he struggled to acclimate in Edmonton over that little bit of a stretch run that they had before COVID kind of shut everything down. So, I give these teams credit for jumping the market and making these moves and stuff. And it's going to be interesting, as Cam mentioned, to see the way, the market plays out over the next couple of months. There's still some great names that are available. Jake Gensel, Jordan Eberle, probably two targets the Oilers have their eyes on right now. I can't fault Winnipeg for wanting to pick up Monahan, though, given what he's been able to do the last year or two.
Yeah, and you mentioned kind of the big names coming off the trade targets list. Well, so much of it depends on the Calgary Flames as well and what Craig Conroy wants to do. But there's another name. The Western Conference has been in the headlines lately because pour one out for an Oilers old coach. Todd McLellan let go from the LA Kings. They're 23, 15, and 10 on the season, but as we know, they've absolutely plummeted and cratered lately. Coombsy, did you see this one coming?
Yeah, this seemed like this seemed inevitable, unfortunately, for Todd McLellan, who obviously doesn't deserve to get fired by the LA Kings. He's done a good job as their coach. The Oilers, of course, we have faced them in the first round of the playoffs in back-to-back years, and they were a difficult team.
They're good.
Yeah, they're a good, solid team, and they made some moves this summer that maybe you look back in hindsight and you wonder if going out and acquiring and paying Pierre-Luc Dubois $8.5 million annually was really the move. They thought they were getting the guy who was going to take the throne eventually from Anze Kopitar, and I don't think he's been that player just yet. And the reality is the Kings aren't going to go trade Pierre-Luc Dubois in the middle of the season. They're not going to pay the price in January, February to make that big trade that Vancouver did, the trade that Winnipeg just did. So what they went ahead and did is fired their coach, and now everyone's going to tighten it up a little bit. And I guess hopefully from Los Angeles' perspective is firing the head coach makes everyone play a bit better, because there was a few games ago they blew a 3-0 lead, and Drew Doughty lashed out at his teammates in an interview and said, there's guys on this team that care more about their points than they do about winning. And I mean, you go up 3-0 and you think, here we go, easy win, I'm going to get myself on the score sheet, and then you lose the game, and all of a sudden the Kings are a bubble team for the playoffs. This is a team that thought they could win the Pacific Division this year, and it's really not looking like that. So we'll see if this is the spark that they need.
Drew Doughty looking for a spark in that post-game interview. Clearly the GM looking for a spark in the same thing. Zachary, did you see this one coming?
Honestly,
I was a little surprised.
I was too, because
FB touched as well.
Rob Blake had given a vote of confidence to Todd McLellan this offseason by giving him a 1-year extension that was going to run for next season. And I don't think anybody expected this to kind of happen. LA had a great start to the season, 16-4-3, landed them second spot in the Pacific Division on December 7th. And since then, they're 7-11-7. Now, that doesn't jump out as an absolutely terrible record. They're still securing points. They're still in the playoff picture. But the truth of the matter is that, they went from being comfortably in second place in the division to now being passed by the Edmonton Oilers. The Kings are sitting at the time of recording in the first wild card spot in the West, but they're 3 points back of the Oilers for third spot in the Pacific Division. So, we saw this earlier in the season for the Edmonton Oilers, right? The Oilers had to stop the bleeding. and they had to make a difficult choice to fire Jay Woodcroft. Now, how funny would it be if Jay Woodcroft ends up in LA as a retread, right? Like, how
I would
hilarious
hate that.
be, right? But again, in the big picture, Todd McLellan, based on points percentage, going to finish as the 4th most successful regular season coach for the LA Kings, but he could never get it done in the playoffs, right? He ran into the buzzsaw that was the Edmonton Oilers in the 2022 playoffs and the 2023 playoffs. I'm not overly surprised by it because McClellan's also kind of an older school coach, right? And that messaging can sometimes get lost on players and the team. And that kind of seems like that's what happened here.
Yeah, maybe they lost their spark a little bit. I can't believe you mentioned Jay Woodcroft as the LA Kings coach. I just started processing that one for a minute. I was like, that would really, really hurt. That would stop.
And, that was the concern too with Todd McLellan there, right? And like, I remember going into that playoff series in 2022 being like, well, Jay Woodcroft is this young coach who's had no real NHL experience. And what if this old, wily veteran in Todd McLellan, goes out and coaches Jay Woodcroft? And it was the exact opposite, right? That was exactly what we saw happen. Woodcroft was able to get this Oilers team in a really good place. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see. They promoted assistant coach Jim Hiller to interim head coach for the rest of the season. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with LA the rest of the season here, because if they fall out, like, I don't even think it would be out of the equation for them to maybe sell off some assets too. Arthur Kaliev is a player who kind of seems to be on the outside looking in right now. Does that change under a new head coach? LA is going to have about a month here to kind of make some really difficult decisions as to, where they are as a franchise right now.
Yeah, it's a gut check time, especially with some wily veterans on that team. You mentioned Kopitar, you mentioned Doughty, but let's bring it back to the Edmonton Oilers here for a moment. There's still some notable forwards left in Frank Saravoli's trade targets list. Number 6, Adam Henrique. Number 8, Nick Dowd. Number 9, Andrei Kuzmenko, the old double flip. Who knows? Number 13, Anthony Mantha. Kumzi, let me ask you, are any of these names interesting for the Edmonton Oilers? Who would you like to see them target?
It's hard to say now. I mean, I wasn't in love with the idea of Lindholm as a fit. I understood the logic, but I wouldn't have been happy if the Oilers went ahead and made the exact same trade that Vancouver made, whatever that would have entailed for them. That seemed like a bit much. And as Zach said, first rounder for Monahan, you can see why it has to be that way because of the cap hit. That $2 million cap hit for Monahan makes him a pretty pricey asset to acquire. But from an Oilers perspective, these aren't the needle movers that's really what I'm looking for. And I mean, I think from Edmonton's perspective, ahead of this deadline, what they can't do is get themselves too laser focused in improving one area of need. What they have to do is recognize there's a handful of different ways they can improve this roster, whether it's a D-man, whether it's a 1B goalie, whether it's a winger, whether it's a center, whether it's a player who's signed beyond this year, who knows, a younger guy that can grow with the team, something like that. They don't have to be narrow-minded and think, all right, second line center, we need that. We need to do it no matter what. We'll pay what we have to pay. Just figure out different ways. What's the easiest way you can go about making the biggest impact on your team? How can you go ahead and give up the least amount to do that? Because I think you want to hold on to some assets because maybe this summer you want to, say, trade Jack Campbell to somebody else so they can buy him out so you don't have to have that on your books. You have to save some assets for maybe more moves that are coming in the future. You should be all in right now, but maybe 95% all in as opposed to 100% all in.
I like that. I like that a lot. Listen to Coombsy. Zachary, are you still looking? Do you want to upgrade the forward group more or the defense group? I feel like there's some notable names here in the forward group. The D core, maybe not as much out there on the market. What do you think the Oilers need to do?
Yeah, I think the Oilers need to go and find the best player available. Kind of think of it like a draft almost, where you go out there and you say, Jake Gensel's probably the best player available right now. That's the guy that I would have my eyes on if I were the Edmonton Oilers here. Jake Guentzel has played with skill. He's played with Sidney Crosby for a long time. He's a little bit more of an offense-first winger, but he is very, very good at providing that offense. Adam Henrique, I'm not so sold on it, right? We just saw the return that Sean Monahan got. So, Frank Saravalli did a deep dive on Adam Henrique over at dailyfaceoff.com the other day. Some of the comparable trades, it kind of looks like the Oilers would have to be coughing up, their first-round pick and a mid to lower range prospect. Now, Frank does say that Henrique would allow the Oilers to keep Ryan McLeod on the wing or load up Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl at the same time for stretches. Both are intriguing options, as Frank said, but, I think that the sights need to be set a little bit higher here. Now, one thing that could be interesting is what if the Oilers go to the Anaheim Ducks and say, yes, we're interested in Adam Henrique, but we would also give you Philip Broberg, in the trade if you took Jack Campbell's contract.
Ooh.
Now, Anaheim's a club who is a ways away from the salary floor for next season with a rising cap. They have the cap space to be able to eat that contract right there. This could be a situation where maybe the Oilers are not only able to upgrade on their forward group a little bit here, but also wiggle their way out of the Jack Campbell contract.
That would be incredible. Coombsy, do you think that could be a realistic option for the Oil?
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. I had thought about the idea of moving it in the offseason to a team like when the Leafs traded Patrick Marleau for the buyout to Carolina. That's kind of what I was thinking. But the idea of swinging that deal and getting a team like Anaheim, who appears to have no aspirations of being competitive ever again. It's like this team looks like they're so far away from being good. Jack Campbell's contract is going to be long over by the next time the Ducks are in the playoffs. So, I mean, that makes sense to me. Sign me up.
Yeah, I just assumed that I've mentally had the expectation we're going to be stuck with Jack Campbell's contract until the summer. The idea of that gets me very excited. That's what you get here at the Notebook. Some other big news around the NHL and hockey world. Coombsy, you were just explaining this one to me before we stepped in the studio here. The Four Nations Faceoff is going to be a thing next season, and that means no NHL All-Star game?
Yeah, so at this year's NHL All-Star game in Toronto, Gary Bettman announced there would be no All-Star game next year, as rather than doing that over the course of a few days in February, between February 12th and 20th, 2025, there will be a Four Nations Cup featuring players from Canada, the United States, Sweden, and Finland, all of whom are NHL players under contract, 23-player rosters, just like you're an NHL team, and they're going to do a little round robin with the 3 points for a win international style scoring system. And then the two teams at the top of the round robin group will play a winner-take-all gold medal game, kind of maybe it's Canada versus States, Sweden versus Finland. I think that's kind of what they're looking for. Get that sort of international flavor during the season, bring it back to life.
I like the idea of, you always got to keep the All-Star game fresh and whatever you're doing. I do like the national allegiance that comes with it. In the old days, sometimes the NBA would do Team Europe versus Team North America, that kind of deal. Zach, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm intrigued to see what happens. Yeah. I was a huge fan of the World Cup of Hockey a number of years ago when that happened. So this kind of seems like a bit of a retread of that. Now sign me up for best on best. I don't really care what it is or how it happens. Obviously this is how it's going to be happening, but I just think it's great that we're finally going to get to see best on best here. Because the truth of the matter is that there's a lot of incredible hockey players out there like Connor McDavid who have never really gotten the chance as NHL players to represent their country on the big stage. Now we're going to get to see a couple of Olympics. 2026, we'll see, McDavid and Sidney Crosby playing together. I mean, hello. That's going to be a lot of fun to be able to watch, and something that I think everybody should be really, really excited for.
I'm incredibly stoked for the Olympics with NHL players once again. It feels like it's been a minute. I still remember the 2002 Salt Lake City, Joe Sakic, Paul Kariya team. Those are my dream Olympics. But I would be doing the fans a disservice if I didn't bring it up. You just kind of brought it up. Connor McDavid and Sidney Crosby, the leader of this company, Jay Downton, has gone a little bit viral, Zachary, because he's presented the idea of the Oilers acquiring Sidney Crosby. I follow you on Twitter, and I saw you a week or so ago broke down a way the Oilers could acquire Sid, the middle-aged man. Zachary, is that a possibility? Could this actually happen, or is this just classic blow and smoke?
It does feel like a fever dream, right? It really does. I mean, credit where it's due. Rob Baruso had reported, when that kind of conversation started up, that Crosby's made it clear that he wants to be a Pittsburgh Penguin for the rest of his life and play out the remainder of his contract. But I mean, how can you not get a little bit excited just thinking about it as a potential option, right? In the grand scheme of things, would it happen? No, probably not. Now, of course we can have some fun with it. So back on January 25th on Twitter, I did a little, mock trade sort of thing, had a little fun. I loved it. Right. The trade was, Xavier Bourgault, Jack Campbell, the first round pick in 2026, and the third round pick in 2026 to Arizona, just to clear out that cap space. Then the Pittsburgh Penguins eat half of Crosby's remaining contract for Philip Broberg, 2 firsts and a second, and literally whatever else the Pittsburgh Penguins would want. I don't care what it is. If Daryl Cates has to take on some personal debt of the Pittsburgh Penguins organization, I hope Daryl Cates would be willing to do that.
Hand up, I'll help too.
You know what? I can find some pennies in the couch if they really need it. I think it would be tremendous for it to happen. It does feel like just a serious pipe dream. But you know what? Hey, I do think that if there's an argument to be made for Crosby to wanting to win another cup. I don't know if the Penguins are going to be able to do that. It really doesn't seem like it's going to happen. with the group of players that they have there right now. So, hey, you know what? Who knows? He's got 2 years left on his deal. Maybe next year at the trade deadline, we're having a different conversation about where Crosby and the Penguins are.
It would be an insane move to sign a Carlson, sign Evgeny Malkin, and then before the trade deadline, ship out the face of your franchise. But if it's to Edmonton, I'll bring it along quickly, Coom. Fever dream, or the Penguins actually going to eat half of Sidney Crosby's money?
Unfortunately, probably a fever dream. It does seem like this is the NHL we're talking about
Yeah.
here. Like, if this were the NBA and we're thinking about, all right, like, is LeBron James gonna up and join whatever exciting young team at the end of
Well,
his career?
LeBron might. So.
You know what? Actually, yeah, like it might happen in that league. But to think that Sidney Crosby, who's now spent, we're coming up on 20 years. It'll be in 2025, 2026. So it's hard to imagine in this league with these players, somebody like changing their legacy at the end of their career. As cool as it would be to see, but I think that Olympic team is going to have a lot of Oilers flavor. We could rattle some names off, or you might see in the Olympics, Connor McDavid. How about Zach Hyman? How about Evan Bouchard? How about Stuart Skinner as Team Canada's goalie?
Yep.
Who knows? Might be a lot of Oilers flavor there.
All right, well, Oiler fans can keep dreaming, and we will keep drumming up trade ideas, rumors, and storylines. We'll be back next week once again on Tuesday, peddling more rumors, more storylines, hey, maybe even more deals as things start to heat up as we lead into the NHL trade deadline. Zachary, thanks for doing this. Coombsy, thanks for doing this, and we'll catch you next week.